And welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shayna Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for my people. Today's theme is Building the Black Educator Pipeline and the fight for a quality education. So welcome, Dr. Carr. Welcome.
Always good to be back here in this space. And every time we get together, more and more people are listening and spreading the word. So it's always an honor to sit at the table with you and be in dialogue. And I would just say one thing, though. It isn't me. It's we. We all doing this together. I'm excited about this Freedom Summer, what we've been doing around this issue.
Yes, I'm super excited, too. And I just thank you, as always, for, again, being a constant guest on this show. But being somebody who is in the struggle and doing the real work, and you've really been in it with our JSLs this summer. So I'm super excited to hear from you about what's going on.
Thanks is mutual.
So what I want to start with, right, is just so folks have a reference for what we'll be talking about today. And it is this book right here that you have been working with our young people through, and they've been reading all summer and doing research and working on projects for. So I want folks to have a context. Just the name of the book, y'all, is Creating a Grassroots Movement to Transform Public Schools, Quality Education as a Constitutional Right. And this was a group collective on this book with Teresa Perry, Rob P. Moses, as we all know him as Bob Moses, Joan T. Wine, Ernesto Cortez Jr. and Lisa Delpit are editors and writers and contributors to this book. So if you need a reference for today's conversation, please make sure you order that book and check it out. Yes. But Doc, I want to start with asking you, what constitutes a quality education? Like, what are the elements of a quality education, and how do we measure that? What constitutes quality education?
Well, this is what we've been talking about. We don't have a definition. We know what we want that will enable it, but really that is the question. What constitutes quality education? We have to think about what the context is, what are our objectives, who is we? You know, we are living now. This is the last generation who will be in a United States of America that is majority white. So when we start talking about national standards, one of the things the young people, and before I say anything else, the team there, yourself, Anshere Hines, Stephanie Joy Tisdale, everybody at the center, of course, Baba Sharif, just creating this space has been remarkable. And as we continue in this work, we have to pause and acknowledge and, in fact, celebrate that we are building collectively. So to all the coaches, and for those of you who this may be your introduction to the concept of freedom schools, as we've done it in Philadelphia for many years and connected to that long momentum of freedom schools, all the nations. So, Octavius Catto and Caroline LeCount, and all of them, I started naming them. I got to name everybody, right? Constance Clayton and September Clark and Fannie Jackson Cobb and Ruth Wright Hare, Marcus Foster, the Cordero Nation, which you could say either Celestine or Raphael, because they were brother and sister in Puerto Rico, breaking the chain that separates us from literacy. All of those nations have been having this conversation now for a month over a month on this question of what it means to have a quality education in a society here in the United States, or even in specific states. And of course, all our crew from not just Philly, but Camden and New Jersey and Detroit and Oakland and the Bay Area, all the coaches, Coach Cole and Brown and Brother Trey Shine and Coach Alexander and Townsend, everybody just is amazing. But at the center of this, who has been defining what it means to have a quality education? Most of this has been driven this last month or so, over a month, by the junior servant leaders. So, every week Oriana got something to say about it, or Faith or Jacob or Malachi, Malik, everybody coming in every week, Destiny, Aisha, I started naming them all. And what we all have a consensus on is that the first thing about a quality education is it has to be something that serves us, serves our communities. And it has to be something that's inclusive. A quality education must involve input from everybody. And that's something Oriana says every week. In other words, teachers should drive it. and students and families and communities should have input and participate in it. So it has to be collective. And the only other thing I would say initially in terms of quality education as a foundation for people of African descent, and this is something that I heard Haile Gerima say, the filmmaker, a few weeks ago. We were at the National Gallery of Art. He showed the first part of his 5-part history of the Italo-Ethiopian War. And he said, no imperialism or colonialism, including mental slavery, succeeds against a people with continuity. And so for our people, for people of African descent, you can't have a quality education if you start that education with oppression, with slavery, with Jim Crow. And so because once you do that, you don't have any continuity. You emerge in history as a beggar. So quality education is defined by non-Black institutions. So you say, well, what are they doing at Harvard? What are they doing at the private high school? What are they doing? We need what they have. Now you have decided that what you want is a slave education. So even if you succeed at the highest levels, you will forever be a figment of somebody else's imagination. And at the core, and at the core of our struggle, particularly what we've been doing for decades now in Philadelphia in particular, has been, and they've really accomplished it this summer. We do it every summer, but I really got to shout out Anshere for this, at leading in this work. We have anchored this question in a deep sense of continuity, beginning with the origins of humanity and coming forward. And once you do that, we get out of the way and just continue to study and dialogue. And what's emerging is a real definition of what quality means to us and for us.
And I love that, because what I'm hearing in the conversation with the junior servant leaders is, one, quality education has to transform in terms of who the education is serving, meaning it's not a cookie cutter approach to that. And everybody doesn't have the same needs. So the education has to serve the purpose of that generation, of that community, of that network of folks. So that's enlightening to hear that young people have discovered that. And I hope that, again, we have the tools to push beyond that. The other thing that you say that's really interesting to me, definitely, if you let somebody else define history, especially for Black folks, like we emerge as these beggars, always wanting and needing something from the folks who appear to be in control. But I think why that tends to be mashed up in the narrative about Black people in education is because I think people get resources confused with what a quality education is. So when you begin to hear folks talk about what they're doing at Harvard or what folks are getting in private schools, what we're really talking about, and this even goes further back to Brown versus Board of Education, we're talking about the resources that people have to further themselves. We're not necessarily talking about the curriculum or the content or needing you to now come teach me something. We just can we have the same resources you had, right? Can I get the same you got a new book. Why I gotta keep getting your old book? Can I get the same ordering of a new book that you have? Oh, that's right. Harvard, you have all of this money to have these round tables and these think tanks and continue to open up these institutions. And like, you have that. We still back here learning at our one room treehouse. That doesn't make your education any more quality than ours.
That's right.
Your resources though, or what we want to get in touch with, or what we're just asking, can we have equal access to? But I think in this conversation, when we're talking about what quality is, people will get very focused on the resources and not focus on the substance.
That's exactly right.
Of what happens, which is why the age-old argument still continues on. Like, okay, we have these poor Black children. We gave them access to great buildings with wonderful paint on the wall, and we need to talk about this broken window theory, right? Like, those are the things that come up when you start talking about poor Black children. But where's the conversation around still years after years? We're still failing Black children because we're not talking about the substance of what they're being taught and how they're being taught. So I love that the conversation.
Well, we talk about it, but we don't talk about it with us as the point of reference. We talk about it with other people. We've completely erased, except to write a book that maybe 100, 200, and maybe 1,000 people will read and pat ourselves on the back. But we completely erased the continuity of understanding that when we did not have the same, and we've never had the same material resources, not in this settler colony called United States, but the quality was defined by the content, the culture, and what it did for our communities. Mm-hmm. So we need resources. Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you got to support the Center for Black Educator Development. We got to set it because that enables us to buy back the thing that we need, that is the most valuable thing we have, which is our time. Mm-hmm. So, so we need to be able, and we discovered this, of course, when we started Philadelphia Freedom Schools. In that Philadelphia Freedom School iteration in the late 90s, we were in partnership with the Children's Defense Fund, and they really didn't have a curriculum for older teenagers because they said, well, by the time they get to be 15, 16, 17 years old, they're going out to make some money. So what happened was the School District of Philadelphia endowed Philadelphia Freedom Schools with enough money to basically buy back the time of teenagers. So that's where junior serve lease could come from. Because if you're 17 years old, you're trying to make a little money in the summertime. So we had to pay them. And we do need resources. And by the way, we pay taxes, which means it's our money. Nobody gave us anything. Give me my money back so we could pay our young women and men to go do this work. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we need or even are looking for initially the same amount as these other institutions. If we have enough to buy back our time, to have institutional space, to be able to compensate those who undertake this work so that they can, have this to support their families, communities, I'll take my chances with that. And people say, well, don't you want more? Of course we want more. We had a whole conversation around chapter 3 in this chapter 1, which is actually the second section in the book, in part 1, Miss Baker's grandchildren on the Baltimore Algebra Project. Mm-hmm. And the young people really got a real good conversation going about what it means for young people to see how city budgets are put together, how state departments of education work, and how you can organize to get your money back, get your tax money back and put it where you want it. At the same time, how do we know that we define quality education, and even when we don't have equality of resources, we can succeed? Well, we would call that the period of U.S. apartheid or Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. Those schools did not have equal resources. And however, in terms of quality, the Black educators, many of whom had college degrees from HBCUs, some of whom even through the doctorates at some of the best American universities that they were sent to study at outside the South because the racists in the South would not let them go. So they sent them to Michigan and Ohio State, to Columbia, to Stanford. They came back South and became high school principals, became guidance counselors. And what you saw was a pipeline, and talk about a pipeline, of students who were deeply educated by master teachers and administrators of African descent who were trapped behind the curtain of apartheid. So that, as you say, the struggle to break out of that, alongside the struggle to get rid of segregation in public accommodations and segregation across the board, was really about equity in terms of resources. Mm-hmm. And what was sacrificed, unfortunately, and what we don't spend enough time reconnecting to, being robbed again of that continuity, is the lesson that we never wanted to lose our culture. We never wanted to lose our control of how we educate our children. What we demanded was, no, we want some of our tax money back. Yep. So that we can do it more effectively. So you make a very important point in that. And the young people are picking up on it and really deepening that conversation because they have time now, bought back from whatever else they will be doing by the resources we have to sit with this information, to sit with each other. And in this circle, they are coming up with some profound insights on how we can then make this happen again in this generation.
I love it. Definitely love it. So I'm also curious with our young people, right? Because you get into education itself and what it is, right? And I think that being in a part of this study and reading the book, they know that education is beyond the walls of a classroom. I think they're starting to develop that concept. But the question that I'm curious to have you gotten to with the young people is education a constitutional right? Because, when you think about when it was illegal, literally, for our ancestors to read and write, or to be taught anything, like it wasn't a constitutional right of theirs to be educated in the sense of formally reading and writing, kind of thing. It just wasn't. And now it is legal for our kids to learn how to read and write. But receiving a quality education, I would argue, is not a constitutional right. Meaning they say you can be educated, but the education you're receiving most certainly doesn't have to be what we would consider of standard, of excellence, or of quality. So I'm curious if you've gotten to debate that with the young people about is education a constitutional right in the United States?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and this again is the value of the way we approach this, which I would always contend, being familiar with a number of different programs and work with a number of different programs, is unfortunately unique, I think, in the United States when it comes to our people and our young people. We very quickly distinguish between the things we can establish factually and the things that we are then beginning to theorize and think through and move to action. So there's no debate. There is no constitutional right in the federal Constitution to education, including a quality education. It's not in the document called the United States Constitution. So we don't even have to spend any time debating that. Now, what gets interesting, and of course, this is something, as you say, I mean, the being prevented to read and write in English and acquire what we would call literacy, unfortunately, in this society, realizing that there are many different types of literacy. One of the grounding literacy, which is cultural literacy. We've always been literate in our cultures. So when we talk about literacy, most people really what they're referring to is literacy in certain forms, like reading and writing in English, numeracy, this kind of thing. Yep. But having been prevented from that, what we've been getting into a very good conversation about, and this really ties in particular to one of the chapters in part 2, chapter 3, Jeannie Oakes' chapter on the Williams versus California case, is the distinction between states and the federal government. There are state constitutions in the United States where the right to a quality education is written in the Constitution. And then what that really reveals then, and this is where we really had some rich conversations, this our 4th week together was when we got into the Williams versus California case, it directly after the previous week, we spent time with our sister Imani Perry, her chapter, which precedes that, chapter 2, on the limits and possibilities of a federal constitutional right. If it was in the federal government, what are the limits or possibilities? And this is when the young people really got into a deep think and conversation around what the limits of the law are. In other words, once you have established in the Constitution that there is a right, how then do you guarantee that right? You still got to protect it. And so in week 4, I mean, really just again, I'm thinking about Oriana, I'm thinking about Malik, Charisma, Jacob, getting into this deep conversation. And then the coaches, the academic coaches got in, Coach Brown in particular, Coach Cole, and then Sister Njamele was there, who of course a master teacher for many years, a freedom school veteran, in this conversation about the Williams versus California case. And this is a case where the state of California was sued because what the young people and the communities that they came from, their families said was, we don't have, as you say, textbooks. We don't have teachers. We don't have a physical plant, equipment. We don't have, and so we are suing because in this Constitution, the state of California says we are supposed to get a quality education. It's written in there. The state of California's response was there's no evidence that if you had all those material things, your performance would be any better. And so we got into a conversation because you said this earlier. I mean, what if everybody had the same equipment? Everybody had the same number of teachers. And then the conversation really gets revealed. Okay, when you say quality teacher, what do you mean? Is this teacher culturally competent? Does this teacher have content mastery? And then we start getting into teacher education, what teachers know, classroom management. How did classroom management become the most important thing? You're just talking about adults in a room. And these young people immediately reveal the essential question. If it is written in the law that you are guaranteed X, that does not mean that you're going to get X. So people think, well, we got to get a constitutional right. Okay, now once it's there, what? The whole document, you got a 14th and 15th and a 13th Amendment that's supposed to guarantee certain things, and you got the police out here killing black people, and nobody went to court. But it's written in the document. It really, I mean, I really can't communicate how powerful it is when young people, old people, communities have time to read, to think, to work together, because what it then allows us to do is empower ourselves to make the strategic decisions and then move together that can transform a society. And that's not, I'll say one other thing. The reason that the book is at the center of our work in Freedom Schools is because this society is absolutely built on a hierarchy that creates the illusion that some people are better than other people. In order to understand this stuff, you got to have a bunch of degrees. You got to go to the right schools. You don't understand the Constitution. Oh no, we had a whole conversation about the Ninth Amendment. What? Well, I can read. There's some people in this room who know this stuff, and I can acquire that knowledge too. And once you say that, and it's not a GPA requirement, and you don't have to come in here with 5 letters of recommendation. No, we are in here together. What we're doing week by week, and in this program and in this thrust, we're dismantling the hierarchy that communicates to our young people and to our community that if you didn't come through the right Mother May I status system, you can't think about this stuff. Yep. And that's really coming out. And that is quality education. That is one of the elements of quality education. Everybody can acquire it because we all have the same equipment.
Yep. And I love that in terms of like, if you didn't come through the same system, right? Or these particular systems that you don't have access to these things. And I think Freedom Schools always, to me, like just shatters that and breaks that down. Shatters that.
As Aisha Imani used to say, when they say, well, who do y'all know? She would always say, we know each other. That's what but who do y'all know to get? No, we know each other. Why are you asking me that stupid question? We know each other. And that, you're right. It shatters it. It shatters it. And see, that's a problem for people whose careers, whose prestige, whose self-esteem relies on the idea that they somehow giving something to us. Mm-hmm. That is a problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yes.
And I always say, like, if people understand the way the world works, even when we're talking about, when you talk about education, there's always this thought and theory of giving or saving. Somehow, which again, this is a job of service, not giving or saving anything or anyone. Like, we are of service and we are in community of one another.
That's right.
And in community, we all have a job to do. So you're not saving, you're not giving. But yeah, that type of language and those type of attitudes concern me. But we all know, right? Like, that's American indoctrination, right?
You're
wrong.
That's
you're
right.
wrong. When you get a taste of the wrong education, it puts you in that mindset. It drives you to believe that that's what you should be gaining to achieve. I'm getting this status so I can go give back. And sometimes I've now like hesitated to say that, like, teaching is a way to give back to your community. And I use that though, right? Because it's the hook, because that's what people know. But in a sense, like, no, teaching is a way for you to be of service to your people. It's actually an honor to teach and to lead.
Right. In fact, oh my goodness, in week 4, when we got into that Williamsburg, California chapter, the young people started this, and then the coaches came in around this very issue you raise. Why is teaching disrespected as a profession in our society? Mm-hmm. And what began to emerge is the impact that key teachers have had in the development of all these young people and all of us, really. And at the same time, what also emerged was a conversation around when that was not the case in our communities. Mm-hmm. And that really, again, only in a space that we control, where we have that continuity of memory, would you see a conversation emerge around the fact that we have always valued education. And people say, yeah, well, since when? Well, since we created letters and numbers at the beginning of human society, we have a continuity now. So the only thing that we are presented with in this society, like you said, this narrative of giving back, this narrative of saving, this narrative of intervention, which presumes that the people you're going to try to impose yourself on don't value that stuff. When in fact, it's not about that at all. We valued it before there were any other humans on the planet.
Right.
So what you just talked about that's really powerful, because that is the conversation we had in week 4 that emerged. How does not just Black communities, why is education and educators, why are they so devalued? Forget Black, forget Spanish speaking communities, forget LGBTQ, forget Asian. No. Why is education devalued in the United States of America, and who does it serve? And to listen to these young people talk about that, once that light goes on, you can't turn it off.
Mm-mm. You can't turn it off, because when young people understand the purpose of public education or American education, and are able to make the distinctions between the two of what a true education is, they can't be stopped, right? Like public education or education as you're experiencing in America is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Like you're educated to a certain degree of what folks want you to know, where they want you to be, or what they want you to accomplish in society, right? And people in the hierarchy talk about this all the time, right? There has to be people on the top. There have to be people on the bottom. Forgot when I was listening to, and somebody was saying like, yep, there has to be people who has to, sweep the floors at McDonald's and flip burgers. But these particular people are the people that we want to do that. So we're going to make sure that that's all the levels of resources they have access to through their educational experience.
That's right.
And you and
you had to be very careful. Okay,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you only
know what you know, right? So even as you're talking about continuity, and being able to, we always talk about this, memory, right? Being able to hold on to that, in our history and our narratives, because you only know what you know. So people who are born into this American indoctrination and don't know or haven't been taught or exposed to who they really are, or the history of who they come from, right? That is the nonsense that you accept. And then you're left wondering, why is this so unfair?
That's right. You're dissatisfied, but you don't have a pathway to deal with that dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. I mean, it is, and that came up yesterday as well, the distinction between schooling and education. Yeah, I mean, education, ultimately, I'm thinking about Paulo Freire, thinking about bell hooks, who have said what we've been saying all along, all of us, which is, education is fundamentally, in an oppressive society, educating those who you're oppressing, that's a subversive act. And I think that's what Brother Jarvis Givens meant when he called the pedagogy of black teachers during segregation fugitive pedagogy. Mm-hmm. They're absolutely right. But here's the problem, and here's where we've corrected that with the Freedom Schools model. And again, Ashere has done incredible work integrating these Africana studies conceptual categories that were developed for the School District of Philadelphia's African American history curriculum, but were developed in conversation with Freedom School students in the early 2000s, in the early aughts. The distinction between a social structure question, which asks, who are we to other people, which is where you would dump all that education conversation around. Yep. What did people need us to do? And a governance question, which is, who are we to each other? Once you've put that framework in place, everything opens up, and we don't confuse the two. So people say, well, in the economy of the future, these are the new jobs and these are this. So we're going to have an education system. People say, hold on. Thanks for the skills. Thanks for the curriculum. But who are we to each other? And then it becomes, no, what you've done is you got your business people together with your politicians. You decided what my future is going to be. And then you try to put a curriculum in place that will do that for my children. And my question to you is it the same one your children are taking? And you never answer because you know the answer that is hell no. I would never let my children take this. But if we don't have, you know what I'm saying? But if we don't have a framework, and this is the great structural failure of Black education in this country. And I'm talking to everyone who calls themselves working in curriculum and instruction, everybody dealing with quote unquote pedagogy. If you don't ground, when you're talking about us, if you don't have a conceptual framework that allows you to distinguish between who African people are and what social structure they find themselves in, then you're spinning your wheels and you always going to find yourself in a dead end. Although you yourself might have a nice bank account and get a few awards and look up and have some books published and get a pat on the back, our people will continue to suffer. And guess what? The young people, once they have that conceptual tool, it all opens up. And then you say, why are we learning this? Or better yet, why are we being asked to do this work? In fact, as Sonia Sanchez would often say, yeah, but how do it free us? Because I don't see, I see how this can help me as an individual, but what about everybody else? Well, we got a spot for the rest of them people. Really, what is it? Well, we don't want to talk about that. We're policymakers. And this is, again, going back to that chapter on the Algebra Project. when these young people in Philly and Camden and Detroit and Oakland and around, who are now part of this burgeoning movement through the center of this international, in some point, freedom schools movement, when they started digging into how these young people in Baltimore, starting with algebra, who have been, many of them been told, you can't do math. No, I just didn't have the right people who had an investment in me doing this. Then they start asking policy questions. Next thing you know, it is school board in Baltimore saying, where's the budget? Show me the superintendent. Next thing you know, they call for the resignation of the state superintendent in Maryland and say, you have not served us. And the people had to listen to them. Why? Because as they were learning, they were organized.
Yes.
But they had stopped confusing what the society wanted for them for what they wanted for each other. That's the fundamental thing we have to understand.
And that brings up 2 points for me in something that you said. One is, once folks, especially Black folks who are in positions to change the curriculum or to impact the way that young people think, once they realize that we spend most of our lives living in a constant cycle of who we are to other people and not thinking about who we are to each other, I think that builds a completely different perspective for people. We are constantly responding to not only what other people want us to be, but what other people interpret Black people to be, or Black culture to be, or Black minds to be. Constantly coming up with solutions for things that will help Black people who are not of the culture. But the more we spend time with each other, and talking about who we are to each other and what we want for each other, I mean, you just see great things open, right? Because again, in me doing this work, I'm much more concerned about who I am to Black children and who they are to me. I could care less about what others are thinking about them. But more so about what I think about you, but what I want you to think about me. It's a mutual exchange there. Because for me, again, I can't do the same thing. And I get into this with people all the time in positions of leadership, or we're older, or we're the leaders of programs or organizations. I refuse to do the same thing to young Black people that oppressors did to me, or continue to do to them. Right. It's important for me to establish who I am to them, and for me to hear how they see me and how they experience me as, now I guess I have to own and accept this, especially with these gray hairs, right? Like, as somewhat of an emerging elder in the community. How are these children experiencing me? How do they see me? There was a long history in time, it's still going on, where some of our elders are very dismissive of our young people, and some of our young people are just extremely dismissive or disconnected from our elders. But you have to ask yourself, how does that begin to happen? Because you begin to look at these young people through the eyes of other people and not who they are to us or to you as a community. You would never exile your own from the community.
That's exactly right.
Because I'm trying to remember, what's that African proverb? If a child doesn't experience the warmth of the community, they'll burn it down to feel their warmth. Oh yeah. So,
no question. Yeah, that's right. And we know that would never have been the case. This is a product of enslavement. It's absolutely product. And the afterlives of enslavement, to quote, Carr Whitson called it the afterlives. That's the novelty thing. He said the sequel to slavery, which was Jim Crow.
Yes. And we on to the sequel and the next sequel at this point, because we done moved past Jim Crow and moved into what some would say are more progressive times, but we know that we're just far from that still.
Yeah, no, the class fractures. In other words, in every society, you're going to have classes. But in a capitalist society built on settler colonialism, what we have picked up is a lot of bad habits in a system that doesn't work for anyone. So when we say we are focusing on ourselves, we're not saying that we're against
exactly.
Although we are absolutely against racism. But what we're doing is not anti-racist education. Let's make that distinction.
And this might sound crazy too, if I want to respond to what you're saying. It's what I'm about to say is going to sound crazy. So even when folks like we are against racism, I'm not necessarily against it. Meaning, go ahead and be racist in your own place, in your own time. When you begin to have control and enact that, like where it's now oppressing me, that's when I have a problem. If a whole bunch of racists bought an island and felt like they wanted to be racist on their island, that I don't know about other people, but I wouldn't be bothered by that. Like, I don't.
Well, it wouldn't bother me either, as long as they couldn't, as you say, impact.
Correct.
We're at the moment now where we have existential crises, where no matter where you live, global warming
it's
is
real.
And so, I mean, now you affecting me. So we got to get a hand on you. And the hand doesn't come by trying to get you to go to sensitivity training. Shout out to all the how to be an anti-racist stuff, but that ain't where the shout out comes. The power comes from connecting with people who will not allow this to continue.
Correct.
And the resources from that are in the mirror. They are not in trying to plead with you for our humanity. That just lets you continue to see yourself at the top of the food chain, and that's got to stop.
It has to stop. And you bring up by bringing that up too, like, and I'm not saying that there's not a place for anti-racist work, so to speak, or
no, there's a lot of place for it, just not here. I mean, my thing is, hey, y'all go do that. Go do you. Good luck. But what are you doing? We're preparing the world to come. But we're not gonna, I'm not pleading for my humanity to anybody again.
No, I don't need to plead.
And people say, I'm not doing that. Sure you are. Sure you are. Sure you are. Don't say you're not, but don't bring that over here. We're too busy trying to see ourselves with the continuity. I mean, for our program and our work, intellectual work is at the center, and we're
exactly.
And the self and the community is at the center, and it's institutional. So when we start asking this question of quality education, we start asking this question of how do we transform the society? We are pulling from resources that we have developed over the arc of millennia, not over 100 years of fighting laws, because you're not going to get an answer with that. And so when we talk about how these things have broken down in our communities, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is not, well, when did this break down? No. Ask ourselves if it broke down. And people say, what do you mean? Of course it broke down. No, you watch the news. You read the University Press books, and you assume that it broke down. When did it break down? The answer we often find is that elders respect young people and young people respect elders in those spaces we control.
Correct.
When you typically see generational conflict in Black communities, it's because external pressures, as you say, have miseducated us about, we're listening to social structures. But when you have a community that is looking inward, I don't care how it's described from the outside. Look at these thugs out here. And guess what? The game is the game, and the game got age hierarchies. The game got neighborhood hierarchies. The game, it said, well, it ain't like it used to be. Okay, why not? Why? Because external forces have eroded even the criminal activity. You know what I'm saying? So it isn't like, it's lawless because of external factors.
Correct.
It's not lawless because of how we view each other, because once you have identified someone as part of your community, you treat them as part of your community.
The good, the good,
so
the
these
bad,
young people don't respect anything. No, good, the bad, and uglies. These young people don't respect anything. Guess what? They respect the people they call family. If that means rolling A-Tray Crip, if that means I'm from whatever it means, if you're part of me, I respect you. So the value is still there, but the external forces have so maligned it that we can't see it. And then we come to foundations and other places who say, well, we've got a solution. No, we don't need no solution for you. Because we understand, in the words of young people, gang. Meaning what? Your gang, you know what I'm saying? Your gang does the same thing. Yes. You won't put Trump in jail. You let Joe Manchin destroy the whole damn politics. But when it comes to us, you got a solution for us. You ain't got a solution for yourself.
You don't.
No, we good.
You do not.
We good. Gang.
Gang over here. Freedom School. Gang.
Gang. No question. Gang. It's why would you use the language of gang? Okay, fine. Let's use the language of family.
Fam. I was just going to say that. Fam, then. Like.
Fam. We can say fam.
If gang offends you. But all it.
No question if gang offends you. I mean, go ask the Sacklers. Fam.
Right.
And then everybody here got opioid crisis with fam.
Telling you. But all of this is a representation of folks seeing you as family or as community. So you're exactly right. In spaces that we control, that always happens. Where folks respect each other, and operate under a certain guideline and a certain standard of excellence. You're exactly right.
That's right. And with continuity, we can recover that and re-expand it to where it used to be, because we came here with that attitude. That's
we
right.
did. And the attitude is still here, right? That's the other thing, right? It still exists. As much as people would like to think that it doesn't. Another major problem, this happens in education, but in the world period, the actions of the few imposes judgment on the many, right? So there, and I learned this, believe it or not, this is so crazy. Maybe I was in elementary school and they took us on a trip to visit the police. So we got to visit a police station.
Talk about curriculum and instruction. Why are you taking black children to the police? Okay, this is interesting.
Visit a police station. So we're in the police station. I mean, they let us see the cells and everything, right? So we're in the police station.
Oh yeah. Here's your future home. Did the white children come to the police station and go in the cell? Anyway, but go ahead.
This is a police station, right? And we're in there, and the cop asks us probably in, I don't know, second grade, first grade, and he says to us, do you think it's more good people than bad people in the world? So a bunch of us said bad. But of course, because in our minds, that's all we're polluted with, crime, blah, blah, blah. And the police officer said, no way. There are always more good people than bad. If there were more bad people in the world, we wouldn't stand a chance. I'm using that example to say, when we talk about youth who disrespect elders, when we talk about criminals, we talk about crime in the black community, all this other stuff, it is just over publicized that like this is the thing and this is what's happening, when again at the end of the day, if there was more bad things happening and more this and that, we just would not stand a chance, just as a society, period. And trust me, if black people were out here committing all the crimes, we have much power than we have now. So let's also be clear about that. If black people was out here stealing all the money, killing all the people, we would have way more power than we do as a collective right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be a different kind of reaction. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, black people that stormed the Capitol January 6th, 2021. There'd have been a bunch of dead black people on the steps of the United States Capitol. Some of them shot by black people. Yes. Black cops.
Yes. Exactly. That too. But I just want to be able to draw that distinction. But pulling it back to quality education. So a lot of the stuff that you're talking about and that you're pointing out, especially in regard to how young people are experiencing the book. I can just imagine being 16-year-old and learning all of this stuff about the Algebra Project and how young people are recruited to lead and organize. And I would be sitting there thinking,
and how to read a constitution,
yes,
how to read a case, how to understand politics. I'm very excited. Week 5, we get into Bob Moses's chapter, constitutional property versus constitutional people. So all of that, can you imagine? I wish we'd had that when we were 16.
I mean,
years old. Yeah.
Just the enlightenment. Yeah. I had a piece of it actually when I was 16. But a question that I would ponder too is, we're doing all of this stuff, right? And you look at education and you feel like at some pieces of it, we've either regressed or like nothing changed, right? That I'm back in the same place. How do you answer the question for young people? Why wasn't Brown versus Board of Education or the Civil Rights Act of 1964 able to establish equal opportunity education for black children, right? Like it's subscribed in schools and said like, oh God, like we've made it. Like, look at these things. But if I'm now a kid and I'm having my mind open to understanding the Constitution, understanding everything that's happening in the way the world works, I'm like, we did these things which people would see for black people as political wins, policy wins, constitutional wins. Yes. So then why haven't we established any change or educational opportunities for black and brown children?
Well, because we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the purpose of those cases was. Purpose of Brown was not to establish equal educational opportunities for black and brown children. Brown versus Board of Education was primarily a case that was decided in a political climate, not just in the U.S., but globally, that was combating bad images of the United States abroad as a racist country. That was designed to relieve pressure in terms of this ongoing struggle against white supremacy, and to grant access ultimately to a small group of black elites or would-be elites in a system to reinforce the strength of the United States as an economic power and a political power by attempting to diminish conflict in the United States, particularly around the question of segregation. But the idea that there is no standard definition of quality education in a multiracial, multinational state like the United States, because there isn't one group of people in this country, Brown couldn't address that. And we know that Brown by 1954 is the culmination of a decades-long struggle by Black lawyers and others to destroy Jim Crow. But that strategy, and drawing a direct line from Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 to Brown versus Bush Education in 1954, that strategy was marked by a wide-ranging debate. Because remember, separate was never made equal, even an attempt to make it equal. So there were people, Zora Hurston being one of them at the time, it's like, I don't know about this integration because I don't know that we're going to get resources, but I do know that the valuable things about Black community might be eroding. I'm not sure I want my children going to school with white people. And I will always say that doll test of Kenneth and Mamie Clark's, you talk about one of the most absurd moments in African history in the United States. The idea that somehow the solution to having Black children pick white dolls, which is highly suspect outside the context of the full test, but I'll talk about that another day. The idea that the solution is to stick your child next to the child the doll looks like is absolutely absurd. But again, Brown wasn't designed to give us the resources and the grounding we need. In fact, the effect of Brown, I was just reading my friend Leslie Fenwick's new book, and I just stacked it up over here somewhere else. It's called Jim Crow's Pink Slip, where she's here it is. It just came out recently, Harvard Educational Press. Here's Leslie's book, Jim Crow's Pink Slip, The Untold Story of Black Principal and Teacher Leadership. What happens is after Brown, generations of Black educators, including educational administrators, lost their jobs. They were not going to take them into the white schools, and they had integrated the Black schools in part by backfilling some of those positions with inexperienced whites or giving people jobs or closing the Black schools. So you have all of that institutional knowledge, all of that continuity that disappears from the lives of Black people in Black communities. So Brown, and to bring it right to where we are now, particularly, again, thinking about Imani Perry's chapter 2, and then Bob Moses' chapter 4, dealing with this question of Constitution, its limits, and also who we are and who we've been in this society. What young people are doing in reading and discussing this in community with all of us is beginning to understand the difference between a social structure narrative that has a certain view of who we are, that it needs to perpetuate this system, and a governance narrative that is completely, in many ways, different, even when those moments converge. And so the heroes of Brown, the lawyers, Thurgood Marshall and Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill and James Nabrit and Robert Carter and all that, they're no less heroes. But now you ask yourself, well, what happened to all those master Black teachers in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia? Or then that next generation, what happens in places like Philadelphia and Detroit and Oakland? So now we got a whole Marcus Foster nation. You got a Septima Clark nation. You got a Ruth Wright Hare nation. And you ask, these are Black educators in places like Philadelphia and Oakland who are committed to educating our young people in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. What happened after 1954? And you just see the young people really begin to dig into the fact that we have now had to fight a system that is more segregated now than it was in 1954, but that relieved itself of the pressure of doing anything about it by saying, well, we changed the law. So now it's your fault. That's basically what you eviscerated our system. I should mention one other thing. In week 4, as we were talking about that chapter on Williamsburg, California, I had just gotten a copy of Gary Orfield's new book, The Walls Around Opportunity, The Failure for Colorblind Policy for Higher Education. Orfield was one of the people, and he's been around for a long time. He's at the University of California, Los Angeles now. He was at Harvard at one time. He was part of the team that the young people read about and discussed in California who went in to assess the inequities in that case. But what Orfield writes here is that since desegregation, not only have things gotten worse, there's no solution to be found in repeating the same attempted remedies that have happened over the last 70 years. It's not, you can't get there from here. And I'm thinking like, thank you, man. That's good to know. Now, in our community, we know that, but we have to seize our ownership of ourselves and our communities to come up with solutions that don't rely on continuing to bang our heads against this brick wall called see us, value us. And young people leading in that conversation, young people cannot lead that conversation without being equipped. Yep. It has to be intergenerational. And older folk cannot lead in that conversation without equipping young people. In other words, it is a community solution. So people say young people are the future. I think about something Maulana Karenga often says. He said, if you don't educate young people are our fate. In other words, young people are the future. As a matter of biology, true. As a matter of anything else, that depends. That depends. You don't send a child out unprepared.
You don't. You can't. We have to, again.
You can't. Well, it happens all the time.
I know. And again, I say you can't just because of my passion for you, right? So,
yes,
I was a youth, I always felt like it was my job to like kick the truth to the young black youth. But Maulana,
no question. You got a question.
Maulana Karenga is exactly right. When if they won't be our future, they'll be our fate. But I was a strong believer in that. Like, there will become a time where, again, somebody else has to lead in this nation. Somebody else has to take over this nation. It's going to be our young people. Like, we all, as morbid as it is, we all going to die, right? So the cycle is going to continue. Yeah. So how are we preparing our next group of young people to lead and lead fiercely and correctly? And some people just have abandoned that responsibility. I'm not one who has. I feel like you can't, because then what? What hope do we have? Now, a couple of times, Baba, you have referenced Bob Moses. I would love for you just to give a couple folks who are listening just quick on who Bob Moses was and what's the Algebra Project.
Oh, just very quickly, Robert Paris Moses out of New York came to national prominence, mathematician by training, actually, in philosophy of mathematics, in fact, left an academic trajectory to pursue human rights work in the South. The state of Mississippi helped prepare the ground for what became Mississippi Freedom Summer 1964, arriving there earlier under the tutelage of elders in Mississippi like Amzie Moore, Fannie Lou Hamer. Bob Moses, in many ways, became was at the center of that movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee movement, and was valued for his leadership, his quiet leadership, his thoughtfulness, his brilliance, and his absolute commitment to group empowerment. And, as Ella Baker used to say, the job of organizers put themselves out of a job. So Bob Moses will always play the back. And he then, after that moment in the 60s, he and his wife Janet and their children, some of whom I think were born actually in East Africa, spent time in Africa and Tanzania, cycled back, came back to the United States. And when their children, he was not satisfied with the type of math education they were getting in Massachusetts, he asked if he could start coming to class and kind of supplementing that for them. And of course, being the kind of guy he was, it wasn't just for his blood children, it was for anybody who wanted to do it. And out of that emerged the Algebra Project, which is, as Bob Moses used to say, he would say algebra is the 21st century gateway in terms of education. Whether or not a child is equipped with that level of conceptual math and that level of quantitative analysis will determine in many ways their trajectory in a world that is increasingly technological, where you have the so-called STEM fields emerging. Algebra will be the gatekeeper class. And he used algebra finally for two reasons. Number one, of course, is the content grounding, but also really 1A, almost like just 1-1. Was as an organizational tool. So what the Algebra Project does, and again, the young people talking about this as we read Charles Payne's chapter 1, Miss Baker's Grandchildren. It's called Miss Baker's Grandchildren in this book because Ella Baker's the mother, Bob Moses is the son, and these young people in Baltimore and everywhere else with the Algebra Project and all of our Freedom School people, because Bob and Maisha Moses came to spend time with us the summer that we read Radical Equations. Actually, Radical Equations, Dave Dennis came. He sent his lieutenant because Bob was tied up. But then he came a couple of summers later to sit with us as Freedom School, and he really helped us walk through that period. We are the grandchildren. in many ways of Ella Baker in terms of organizing. So the Algebra Project serves as not only content grounding, but it draws young people into a formation where questions of power, questions of process and strategy and access, rebuilding the continuity of memory from time immemorial to now, all comes together so that young people, as part of our community, intervene in policymaking. And so it continues to survive and thrive, and the Algebra Project goes on.
And what I love about the Algebra Project, and it always brings me joy to talk about Algebra Project, Bob Moses, Ella Baker, and what they do, because I feel like I'm just, out here carrying on the mission and continuing the work that they did.
That's it.
Because that's what we're here to do.
That's right.
So to know that, we have young people working on sites and working directly with children and impacting literacy rates, but at the same time, they get to hold the space in community with you and other elders to talk about things like policy, education, and how to impact and how to disrupt, so that when they're coming and working on sites with kids, they're able to see things through their eyes differently than they normally would. When they go back to school in September, they're able to look at the classrooms and the teachers and the curriculum and things that they're getting through a different eye. What I hope that this summer empowers them and makes them feel courageous and proud enough to challenge some of those things that they are experiencing. That's what I hope. For sure. Right.
No, I agree. And in fact, I would say that one of the deep values of our year-round program for many years is, and we talked about this again, it emerged from the young people. At some point we need to be able to drop freedom from this conversation.
School.
And this just be school. You know what I'm saying? And when I think about, again, that Philadelphia curriculum, which for many years we continued to develop parallel through Freedom Schools in Philly and through my classrooms at Howard. Now, it was because after Freedom Summer was over, we start right back in September, October, November, December, January, February. We would continue that dialogue. And so they still had this governance space. And so now what we see, because of COVID, it's been jailbroken. So as you mentioned in class, or narrative and Nubia, this kind of work, that conceptual category framework that is really grounded, again, Ashray and Stephanie and Emma, y'all are doing this incredible work. That work now is closer to what the meaning of Africana studies, of Black studies, always was, which is, it's not about the university. It's not about the hierarchy. It's not about what high school you went to. It's not about what college you got into. This work comes out of our community, and we are jailbreaking that entire thing. So now it's way beyond, and really the people who are involved in this work now have Freedom Schools to thank for that, and those young people. But it's because we don't stop this summer. To your observation,
stop.
We just continue.
So I told you that right? We won't stop.
We can't stop. Okay. Won't stop. We won't stop. You know what I'm saying? But again, any disruption in terms of continuity has been because, to go back to your original point you raised earlier at the beginning, has been because of material resources, and that is an absolute fight. We got Sankofa Freedom Academy open, got a K-12 space. The Center for Black Educator Development emerges and says, we'll take the baton now and continue this. But none of that works without material resources. And these are not things we are begging or asking for. We demand our resources be returned to us so we can continue this work. That's exactly right. It's ours. For sure. No question.
Before we close out, we'd love to hear, with all this work that you've been doing with the young people, what are you looking forward to? What do you think that they're going to, or how are they going to take this book, take this knowledge, take Mbangi, and join the fight for quality education?
It's interesting you asked that, Shayna, and I'll keep this very short. There are two dimensions to that. There is the work to come, and then there is the work we're doing. After every one of our Wednesday sessions, our say-by sessions, our educator sessions and our learning sessions and conversations, I leave that space renewed. For two of our sessions this summer, I had to do it parallel since we're virtual. I was on campus for the first time since March 2020 with a class of summer school students. We do this Introduction to African American Studies class for these incoming Carr STEM scholars at Howard. And the distinction between these freshmen at Howard in summer school, some of the most advanced students in the sciences from around the country who've gotten these full rides at Howard, the distinction between the conversations we're having there, which are very rich and very interesting, and then I step away for an hour plus with our freedom schools, young people, you see, this is what comes from it. And this is where I think you're looking forward. I anticipate, this is the beauty. When you get to college, you're still young, but those institutions reinforce that hierarchy. I don't care whether they're HBCUs or not. And you have to struggle now against another level of expectation that really wants to slot you in terms of a class objective into basically a managerial position in terms of Black community. You're the leaders. We're coming to get you in. But when you're still in high school, you haven't yet had to enter that type of institutional pressure to force you to conform. So the same conversation these young people were having who are now college students, the freedom school junior servant leaders were having without either the pressure of now having to think is this conformist, is this non-conformist? And clearly they're trying to, but really they have the ability to see how to alter their trajectory so that they don't follow those scripts that have been written for us. And that is the genius, because as Gary Orfield is writing in this new book, The Walls Around, you can't start correcting what has happened to our people in college. It's not too late, but it's just that much more difficult. The JSLs have a momentum that we can't even imagine what they're going to do with this, because they're already doing it. In other words, they're modeling it. They're not modeling it. They are doing it now. So,
yes.
You know what I'm saying? So we'll say, well, what's going to happen in the future? No, what's happening? What happened last Wednesday? What's going to happen next Wednesday? What's going to happen a month from now? They're already doing it. Now, what we have to do is surround them so that they are never interrupted from doing that again. That's our job.
Surround those young people. Yeah. Help them continue to build that community. Surround them and protect them. For sure.
That's exactly right. And expand it so that we're all part of that circle, because we are all part of that circle. And that's how you change the world. You don't change it by continuing to plead for people for your humanity. You build your institutions and watch the world
nation built in at its finest.
Nation built. No question. We don't even have to people say, well, that's impossible. Really? You did it with basketball. You did it with jazz and hip hop. You did it with jumping rope and braiding hair. You did it every time you sing a song so why would that be any different? It's not. It's not.
For sure. Well, Doc, we are coming up on time. Always our time runs out, and there's so much more that we can get into and talk about. But as always, I want to thank you for always joining us on Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. Brother, you are a gift.
Thank you, Mama Harriet. Thank you.
That's hilarious.
Thank you, Mama Harriet. No, really, you are a true. Hey, look, I know you kind of shy away from the spotlight, but let's be clear: the space that you're convening, and I'm glad you said that, because I want to just say this to everybody listening: you got to tell as many people as you can, not just about these conversations that we have every month, but the incredible archive of conversations that is already built. You need to go back, y'all, and listen to these conversations, these intergenerational conversations, because this is truly an underground railroad. So we listen to y'all's conductor, you know what I'm saying? But don't be like messing with her. Just listen and join, because, Harriet Tubman's effectiveness in part was she can maintain her disguise, but she's very public too. So you got to be y'all got to balance that. But dig in that archive, though. Thank you, Shayna.
Oh, Mama, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. Yes, I do. Yes. But y'all heard Dr. Carr. Tell a friend to tell a friend, y'all, about Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. Please subscribe and share.